Hey guys, Trey Bender here, and today I'm sitting here with Miss Susie tonight, and she was at Straight Incorporated in the early 80s. So we're just gonna dive right in. So Susie, let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
All right, tell us kind of what happened. Like, how did you get caught up in the Straight Incorporated?
Well, my mother was convinced, or at least that's what she said, that I was on drugs and kept demanding that I go take a drug test. So I actually gave in to her because I wasn't doing any drugs, and I thought I was exonerating myself. And when we got to this brick building, it looked like a receptionist's office.
Okay.
And there was a lady sitting at a desk. There were other chairs in the waiting room, and I just thought it was like a cheap clinic, and I thought I was going for a pee test or a blood test to prove that I wasn't on drugs.
How old were you when this happened to you?
16.
16.
And a 16-year-old back in the early 80s was like a 9-year-old today, you know?
I think I can understand that. It was a different era, that is for sure.
Right.
All right, so when you first got there to take this test, like, you were taken there under false pretense?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When you found out this probably not going to be what you thought it was, what was running through your mind at the time?
Well, this lady named Pam came to the door, and she called my name. Looked just like, there was nothing that threw up a red flag, except that I was angry that I was having to go prove that I wasn't on drugs. And so she walked me back to this little, I guess you would call it like an oversized closet. They called them intake rooms, but it was really like the size of a walk-in closet. And there were, I think there were like 2 chairs sitting there. And she asked me to have a seat, and I thought it was strange because there was no sink in the room. There were just 4 blank walls, the carpet, and the chairs. And I thought, this is really weird. You know, I'm sitting here questioning this in my mind, but you know, about the time I started to get up and walk toward the door, another girl came in, and she sat down. Her name was Vanessa, and she sat down and knee to knee with me and started talking to me and wanted to know what drugs I'd done. And I said, I haven't done any drugs. And she just kept talking, and I said, can we get on with the drug test? I mean, I was like ready to go, you know? And she started laughing, and she said, you're not here for a drug test. And I said, what are you talking about? And that's when she let me know, you're at Straight Incorporated. And I didn't watch a whole lot of TV, or the TV I watched was not the commercials, so I had no idea what a Straight Incorporated was, where I was. I kept demanding to see my parents. I think it was early that morning, so it was an all-day affair into the evening,
Okay.
into the night hours that I was in that room held hostage, and I could not get out.
Wow. Did you see your parents at all that day, or what happened after that?
At that night, they told me that if I didn't sign the papers, that I wasn't going to get to see my parents ever again. And so I signed them with my first name and my boyfriend's last name.
Huh.
Because this was actually somebody that I was going to marry. I'd met him at church, and I was 16, he was 19, he was in the military, and we were planning on getting married, and I guess that didn't set too well with my parents. I think that they wanted me away from him, even though I had met him at church, and they didn't want me dating. And it was always a rule in my house, you couldn't date until you were 16. And so, but when I got to be 16, that wasn't happening either.
Gotcha.
And so, that was kind of how that went.
Okay. While you were going through the Straight Incorporated program, what are some things that stand out in your mind, things that you'll never forget? I know it's been a long time.
Well, a lot.
Tell us about that.
I was on first phase. They had 5 phases in the program before you 7-stepped or graduated. I was kept on first phase for most of that time because I wouldn't admit to a drug problem that I didn't have.
Of course not.
And we had to do these newcomer introductions on Monday and Friday open meetings, and you had to state what drugs you'd done, a little bit about your past, some goals for the future, and basically state that you're a druggie. And the only thing that I could ever think of during that time was I had gone on a cruise with my parents, and they had said, we'd had I think it was the captain's dinner, and we had champagne was served to us. And I'm like, what's that? And they were like, it's champagne, go ahead and taste it. I mean, my parents told me that. And so that was a far reach for having done alcohol.
I would say so. I would never really consider champagne to be...
Well, I took a sip, I didn't like it. But when I said that during a newcomer introduction, Miller Newton, who was the clinical director, or self-named clinical director, there was nothing clinical about him. He did not have a medical degree. He had a degree in anthropology.
Gotcha.
But he came across the floor. The kids sat on one side, the parents sat on the other on an open meeting night. So we weren't allowed to interact, except when they passed the microphone. We could say, I love you, after your parents blasted you. So I'm sitting on the front row here, and I'm standing at that point, and I'm giving the introduction. And I thought, well, this is a way I can get off first phase, and I can move, and I can get out of here. I'll admit to this alcohol, which really wasn't alcohol use. It was a parent directed, you can have some champagne. And he came across the room, and my mother, after the program, had admitted that she had thought that he was going to hit me. And I'm like, oh my God, and you didn't do anything? But his face was beet red. He grabbed that microphone, more like snatched that microphone from me. He was this close to my face, and he was cursing me for everything I was worth.
How old were you when this happened?
16. I was a child. And I was so scared. I didn't know. All I knew is I was in a place that I eventually learned I wasn't getting out of. He froze me on day one. And the significance of that is you have to be in the program 3 days before you're called upon, when you're doing this motivating behavior, when you're called upon to talk in a group. And that's how you progress, by getting called on and talking in the group. And they froze me on day one. So basically, you're not going anywhere. And I can't remember how long I was frozen on day one, but I know also at that time, around that time, they took all food away from me as well. They gave me peanut butter, and I got peanut butter in a baggie that I could eat, and about 2 ounces of water a day.
How often, while you were going through this, was food used as motivation?
The entire 11 months.
The entire time?
Yeah, I barely got anything to eat. I think when I made second phase and I got to go home to my home, one of the first things I did was I took a Chef Boyardee pizza out of the cabinet and I made it. Well, because I was hungry.
Absolutely.
I had lost down to like 85 pounds.
Wow.
And I had developed a huge goiter on the side of my neck. It looked like I had the mumps. I was really, really sick. I mean, I didn't have any food. I mean, I had gone beyond, when your stomach growls when you're hungry. I was beyond that point. I mean, I think sometimes I was hallucinating.
What other things would they use besides food to motivate?
Well, they kept me awake. I think they called that marathoning, but I was sleep deprived, and they would take shifts. So I would go to a home in the evening time, and this was after 10 o'clock. It was after 11 or 12 by the time we got to the host home, and it was another old comer in the program. Usually they sent me home where there were more than one old comer. So one old comer would take a shift keeping me awake, and then the other old comer would take that second shift. And so that's how they were able to keep me awake. And if I fell asleep or sat down or whatever, I was punished. And I was even punished by some of the parents. There was one girl, I don't know if I can say names.
We can just use her first.
Okay, so Nancy, her mother, I remember her laughing at me, and they had me standing awake in a corner. And they weren't, and when, it's important to know that when I got home, the only meal that I got with that peanut butter was at lunch. So when I got home to the host home, if they didn't have peanut butter, they didn't, whatever, on Wednesdays, we ate there at the host homes. But at the building, I didn't eat anything, so I didn't eat anything when I got home either. Other people would be having snacks, I wouldn't have anything. But they were laughing at me, and I was crying, and I just kind of collapsed. My legs just kind of fell out from underneath me. And I remember Nancy's mother going over there and grabbing my ponytail, because we had our hair was always had to be pulled back, clipped back or something. And she lifted me up off the ground by my ponytail, and I could hear the hair ripping from my head.
What is a host home?
A host home is, it's a home where a child who has gone further in the program and is now an old comer, because they had old comers and newcomers. Newcomers were on first phase. Old comers were on second through fifth phase that weren't on newcomer status. Because I made it to old comer and got put on newcomer status.
Gotcha.
So I wasn't carried around by the belt loop when I was an old comer, except when I was put on newcomer status. So old comers were the ones that carried other people around by the belt loop. They would put their thumb through your back belt loop and then grab a hold of your back pants. So you were literally being led around by the center of gravity. And sometimes the other newcomer, so one old comer could have two newcomers. Sometimes that other newcomer, if this one was a flight risk, they would also hold on. So there were two people holding on to the back of your belt loop or your pants. It's called belt looping. It's crazy.
I'm sorry, but just hearing that just makes me think, what?
I know you wouldn't hear of that today.
No.
But they've taken it to a whole new level with today's programs. Seeing what they did there and say, okay, well, we'll circumvent this and we'll go around. Now they have them out in wilderness programs and they take their shoes and their food away from them out in the middle of, lions and tigers and bears and say you can't go anywhere. I mean, how are you going to run on that rocky terrain? So
I want to ask you, as somebody that went through the troubled teen industry when you did in the early 1980s, would you say that a lot of things that happened to you, it was easier to get away with back then? Or what would you say?
Probably, but people who came by that building, they thought that it was a drug rehab.
Okay.
They had no idea that it wasn't licensed. And when they were licensed as a daycare facility. They had no idea. They just thought that the kids there were bad. They'd done something wrong. So there were people that passed by that place that had no idea what was going on in the building. And if you tried to tell someone, there were people who copped out, who ran. Maybe they made it to a higher phase and they dropped their newcomers off in the building and they took off. So if you go to the police or something, the judges were involved in putting a lot of people here. And if you go to the police would bring you back there because they thought we were the aberrant, druggy teenagers. And I had never done any drugs to get there, and there were many people that hadn't. Likewise, though, on the other side of the coin, there were people there who were shooting up heroin, who were murderers and rapists that were being diverted from a prison sentence. So they kind of had everybody mixed in together. I think the youngest, when I was there, was 11 years old. And I actually witnessed it was one of the staff members' cousins. I'll never forget it. It was Leanne's cousin, Danny. I'll never forget. She stood up and screamed during an open meeting and ran to her mother and wouldn't let go, had a death grip, but they threw her up against the concrete block wall and you could hear something crack. I thought her head had cracked. I thought they were going to kill her. But she was really tiny. She looked like maybe she was 8 or 9. And she had said something really crazy to be, she stood up and told us, she'd said something really crazy to be with the in crowd. Something like she had smoked pot laced with something that I know today that couldn't be. I can't even remember what it was. It was something stupid. And I'm like going, what? And back then I didn't even know what she was talking about.
Yeah.
Today you look up that information and going, that's not a thing. But she was trying to, I guess, be in with a cool crowd.
Yeah, you didn't have Google and things days. Like
Yeah,
that.
no. Didn't even have a computer. So the computers were just coming out.
Yeah.
But we didn't have one. But yeah, I remember, and I remember the executive director, Dave Tilley, he kept going. She was in one ear saying what happened, and I wanted so much to stand up and say, she's telling the truth, she's telling the truth. But I knew that I would get punished severely if I did that. And Dave Tilley was in the other ear saying, she's a liar, she's a manipulator, she's a druggie. But the things really did happen. There were people there that really did abuse her, and we were trapped.
I want to backtrack on something you had said earlier. You had talked about these host homes. Who ran those?
The parents.
The parents.
Mm-hmm.
So your parents ran one too?
Actually, I found out when I was able to make it home, they had been hosting an old comer that was from out of town. So, I mean, there was no, and my parents didn't have a criminal record, but there were some there that did. There were some there that were child molesters. We heard the kids stand up in group and talk about it. There was no background check on any of the parents. The only thing that they did is they went to the homes and made sure before your kid or any other kid came there that there were deadbolts on all the windows and deadbolts on the doors. So there was no way, unless you took a chair and busted through a window, there was no way you could get out. I mean, there were deadbolts on every door inside the house. So at night, I mean, it was, even when I went home to my own home, I didn't have a key to that door. What they called a foster sister, but it was another old comer in the home. It wasn't a legitimate foster sister. She had the key in her panties. So if a fire broke out in that home, I would have burned to death. And so would have everybody else.
You have to wonder why it is that somebody would have to keep a key in their underwear like that.
Yeah.
You know, that in itself shows.
I mean, I didn't even, when I went to see most old comers when they went home,
Mm-hmm.
they had the key to the door. I guess my parents knew they were doing something wrong. And I know deep in their heart, they know they did something wrong to me. And they were afraid that I was going to run. And had I had the chance, I would have.
You know, that in itself also says, you know, what kind of place this was, that if you felt the need to run away like that, what's really going on?
Right.
I want to ask you this now.
We couldn't use the telephone. I need to tell you this. We couldn't use
Please.
the telephone to call a police, to call 911. I guess 911 was the thing back then, I'm not sure. But we couldn't call the police. We couldn't call an attorney. We had no rights. So that's real important. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm glad you touched on that. I wanted to ask you, but let's go ahead and dive into that. Phone use was restricted?
Yes, we couldn't even read. The people who, well, when I first got there, I didn't have food taken away from me, so they'd have cereal or something. We weren't allowed to read cereal boxes. We couldn't, when we were being transported to and from the building, we weren't allowed to look out the windows and read any signs. They didn't want us to know where we were. So we didn't have any education. There was no reading allowed for the newcomers or the second phasers. When you got to third phase, you were able to go to school, but most of the time you got put on third phase. Even if you went to school or got a job, they'd set you back, so you would lose that, you know, and they did not abide by compulsory attendance laws.
Let me ask you this. You were there for a long time.
Almost a year.
Almost a year. Did you attend school while you were there?
No.
Okay. Did you receive any kind of schooling at all?
No.
Okay.
Matter of fact, before I went in, I was in the 11th grade. I missed my whole senior year. I was scheduled to go be an electrical engineer. I was jointly enrolled at Southern Tech. And I also had a modeling career. I was a Lynn Chrisann modeling school student, and I got taken away from all of that. So no, when I got out, I had actually regressed. I had forgotten all of, I guess because of the brainwashing, I had forgotten all of the algebra to the trigonometry, all of that. I couldn't do any of that anymore. And so I did not go to Southern Tech. I had to take 4 classes, which was 1 semester, 9 weeks, in order to graduate. Because I hadn't failed anything. So that my senior year, all I needed was those 4 credits. And I just took it and got out. I didn't continue on anything else, not until 1990.
As soon as you got out of Straight Incorporated, what was it like reacclimating to the real world?
Oh, wow. Well, I didn't know how to act in social relationships. I didn't know how to act in any relationship. Family bonds were irreparably broken.
I get that.
Yeah, I didn't even know what the current music was,
Gotcha.
what clothing styles were. It was like I had been yanked out of reality and then thrown back into a society that I didn't know how to act, behave, communicate with people. I was really scared. At first, I locked my door at night. I slept with my door locked. I was scared to pick up the telephone and use the telephone. I had a best friend across the street that I had known since I was 5 years old. And I was scared to pick up the phone and call her. Like, I don't even know how to explain that. Like, I hadn't used a phone. I was scared. I didn't even have a learner's license to drive. I was like a zombie. I remember my heart pounding the first time I picked up the phone to call my neighbor and then to call my ex-boyfriend.
While you were at Straight Incorporated, were you separated by gender?
Yes, all the girls were on one side, all the boys were on, for us, the girls were on the left side and the boys were on the right side, and we were not allowed to look at them unless one was standing up talking. And oftentimes they would accuse you of playing eye games or clicking, is what they called it, when you weren't even doing anything. And they would punish you, sit on you on the side of group. And when I say sit on you, they'd lay you face down on asbestos-laden linoleum flooring, and somebody would be pushing your head into the floor. They'd have your arms up your back, like to your neck. Somebody's sitting on those, somebody's sitting on the back of your knees, and somebody's sitting on the back of your ankles and feet, holding them down. And then sometimes they would have arms stretched out to the side instead of up your back.
The separation of gender at the young age, how did that affect you?
I didn't know how to communicate with, well, anybody but the opposite sex. When I got out, and there were people my age, at 17 is when I got out, there were other people that were dating, and I didn't know the first thing about, my class had graduated high school, and I didn't know the first thing about, even how to pick up the phone and call a friend. I mean, seriously, it sounds weird, but I didn't have a way to get out and around, but when I was around my friend, when I finally got the courage to call my friend across the street, I remember her taking me out, and I would do crazy stuff, like hang out of the car, screaming and hollering at people. I didn't know how to communicate with people, and she told me I had regressed to the behavior of an 8-year-old.
Wow, I can kind of relate to that, because when I got out of there, I didn't understand. My development had been arrested.
Right.
Having this happen to you and having children of your own, how has it affected how you raise them?
Oh wow, it truly has, because at first I saw myself with my first child, my eldest. I was, for discipline, I wouldn't sit on her, no. I wouldn't take food away from her, but some of the same things, like knock on all doors before entering, these rules that they had said, I would catch myself saying some of these things. It's like they were ingrained in me. Oh, knock on all doors before entering, and I get real angry. I parented at that time with spankings, with corporal punishment, that I don't believe in today. And I would seemingly get angry, if my child wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing, instead of, trying to work through the problem, because I didn't know how to handle stuff like that. I didn't have any social skills at all. And anything that I had gained in my school years, it was totally regressed. So I really, you know, I know she probably has some animosity towards me, you know, for that today, but I really didn't, it really wasn't my fault. And I really didn't know what I was doing was wrong because I had been taught that abuse was normal. Not that I
Yes.
was abusing her. I know she might have a different version of that, but
Of course.
but I don't feel like I was per se abusing her, but I thought it was normal to yell at somebody, to confront somebody, to, you know, blast somebody or, you know, something like that. I thought that was normal because I had normalized it for that year that I was there. And my parents didn't seem to think anything was wrong. I stood up during an open meeting and screamed I wasn't doing anything until they started feeding me because they were just giving me peanut butter. And my parents' responses were, my mother said I wasn't leaving there, and my father said, I don't think it's your stomach that's hurting you, you have demons in you. And I was like, wow. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely, I've thought about it, I've cried, you know, when I realized that some of the things that were said to me, that I've said them to my kids, I kind of stepped back, I cried. I don't know if any of them ever saw me crying, but I didn't like what they had taught me to be.
How has your time at Straight Incorporated affected your adult life?
It's been hard to keep a job, to get a job, keep a job. It was very hard when I went to college, interacting with people or just getting back into that routine of going to school. It has affected me with my family relationships. I don't talk to my family, to my parents. I did at first, but then I started realizing I've been in counseling for about 10 or 11 years, and you know, I started realizing the narcissistic relationships there, and I said I don't want to be a part of this at all, and I'm not going to be part of this push and pull, and I don't, you know, I did try to talk to, my mother went first, and then I gave my dad a copy of the book, and he's 91 now, and I tried to talk to him, and of course he says everything that I wrote in my book is a lie, and he knows it's not because he joined me in the lawsuit with Straight, so it was really hurtful. I remember I left, I was crying, and I changed my phone number before I left his driveway. I mean, it's really gotten to the point where, you know, they don't think they did anything wrong, even though they knew I wasn't on drugs, and they can't acknowledge the pain and the suffering and the, you know, the starvation. I was 85 pounds, 80 to 85 when I got out, and I was like a skeleton. I look back at pictures, you could see all the bones in my neck. I was really skinny, and I was not healthy at all. I developed thyroid problems because of it. I don't know if you can see, I know they can't see it, but my nails, see the lines and ridges in it? While I was in there, my pinky fingernails fell off due to the starvation. And now they get to where, see how they crack on those lines? But I mean, there's no way I can take vitamins all day long, and it's just not going to bring back. I was without sunlight for a year. Some people were without sunlight for 10 years that were in that program, and weren't being fed appropriately, nutrition wise, educational wise.
Not at all.
And no one is being held responsible for
Not at all.
not following the compulsory attendance for education. It's really sad.
You were in Straight Incorporated in the early 80s, but it was shut down in the early 90s.
Correct.
When it did get shut down, what was your reaction to that?
Oh, I was happy because I had filed lawsuit after I got out, and I settled that lawsuit a month before my eldest daughter was born, in October of '86. And the attorneys that I worked with were with the ACLU,
Okay.
Kathleen Wild, and now a federal sitting judge, Amy Totenberg. And I told them, I said, my goal is not just to win something from this lawsuit. I don't want this to ever happen to anyone ever again. It was very personal to me.
Of course it is.
And I didn't want anybody else to ever be abused like that.
You know, I think that's great. And you know, that's part of the reason why I've been doing what I've been doing, is because I want to bring awareness to this too, and I want to make sure that what happened to you, things that like what happened to me,
Right.
never happens to anybody else again.
Right.
You know, I really want to see the day when that happens.
Yeah.
But you touched on your book, which we actually have a copy of right here. Right here. Got a little closer. So, tell us about writing the book.
So it took me a year to write it.
Okay.
It's not in the order, you know, I would write like one chapter at a time, and then I rearranged it, and I started the book out from the day I walked in to Straight Incorporated. The sounds that I heard on the other side of the door after they had strip searched me, illegally strip searched, by the way, and with a visual inspection of my body cavities. That was part of my lawsuit. It was just like, you know, they treated me worse than a criminal. I don't even know if they do that to criminals.
You know, I've been doing interviews for a while now, and you know, you're not the first person that's told me that they've had that happen.
Yeah.
You know, especially to young women.
Yeah.
I've heard that a lot.
I was totally violated. I feel like it was a sexual assault. There was no reason for it. A simple drug test would have proved that I wasn't on drugs, but you know, I want to go back and say that they took anybody as long as you had a pocketbook. That pocketbook had money in it, they took you. And they kept enforcing that I was there for my behavior. I couldn't figure out what behavior I was there for. You know, at the time I was living actually with my brother. We had gotten to a family dispute, I guess, with my sister watching me while my parents took off to Hawaii. And they had agreed to let me go live with my brother. When they came back, I didn't want to go back home because my brother was, it was a whole different ballgame. My brother wanted me to get a job. I wasn't allowed to do that at home. My brother let me date. I wasn't allowed to do that at home. And so I don't think that my parents liked it that I was living at my brother's either. And so, but you know, he was teaching me to be normal, and I grew up, it was a dysfunctional household to begin with. So when I got out of Straight, it was more of a dysfunctional household. But so I wrote about that in here too, because I think it's important for people to realize what kind of family, what kind of person does this?
Yeah.
What kind of parents put a child in a facility like this, especially, you know, and get abused? What kind of parent, and doesn't even blink an eye, you know? And so I wrote a little bit about my childhood, you know, how I grew up and what led to me getting in there. Then I talk about the program. I give references. There were FBI files on this.
Wow.
The FBI investigated Straight during my case. There was lots of many reports of, you know, parents were unhappy. I don't think my parents were unhappy, but some of the parents that had pulled their kids, they were unhappy. Nothing was ever done. It's like the FBI files just got slid under, but they're in the back of the book. There's a reference to other cases. My lawyers had sued, I think, 11 times.
Wow.
And won successfully every time. It had either settled out, I call winning settle out of
Yes.
court, or actually going to court and winning. And one of the things with my case is they agreed to never sue Straight Incorporated again. But we never stopped fighting. I mean, I was one of the pioneers. We never stopped fighting to shut them down. And that was a main goal. But when they shut down, they just changed their name to the Phoenix Institute for Adolescents. And the executive director at that time was not Dave Tilley anymore. It was Tim Mantooth, and him and Kathleen Cohn went and opened up the Phoenix Institute for Adolescents. So they just moved down the street and moved all the kids with them. So really nothing changed. So, you know, that's kind of why I've been doing this on my own. Is it's great to put laws in place, but there are laws in place, like for these wilderness programs, there are laws in place that say you can't do this, you can't do that, and trust me, I've been reporting them. So I know what laws they're breaking, and they lie to the Department of Health and Human Services, and these regulations aren't closing these places down because they're still abusing kids. They're keeping food and clothing and appropriate shoes, appropriate shelter. They make them go to the bathroom, dig a hole in the ground and go to the bathroom. And I told DHHS, I said, if I take my kids and send them out in the backyard, say, build a tarp, you know, this is all you get to eat, tortillas and peanut butter, quart mix, and, you know, an apple and an orange every week. And then every once in a while I'll throw some meat and vegetables your way. And if you don't know how to cook, if you don't know how to build a fire and cook them over the fire, then you don't eat and you have to dig a hole to go to the bathroom. I said, would that be abuse? And they admitted. I had a friend, another survivor, on the phone with me. They admitted that that would be abuse. And so the laws, there are some laws in place, but you know, we can make all the laws all day long, and unless they're actively enforcing the laws, they don't, you know, no change happens. And so that was one of the reasons that I wrote the book, because I wanted to bring awareness. And I wanted to expose what has been happening, and it's still happening 4 decades later.
Yes,
it's still happening.
It absolutely is. So writing the book really helped you, huh?
It was very cathartic. Although it took a year, there were many times that I threw my computer and my notebook and my pen, and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I had tears running down my face, snot running out of my nose. I was involved in 2 writers groups, and I would call some of my colleagues and I said, I can't do this. They said, yes, you can. So I had to go through and relive a lot of that in order to write this. And it's very detailed. You know, it really puts, for the person who doesn't know anything about these programs, it puts you back in this blue chair, sitting on the front row, and hearing and seeing and feeling and experiencing all of the things that we were experiencing as children.
You know, I'm glad that you were able to write that. You know, that really shows that you're really trying to overcome this, and I
Yes.
feel like you have.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just hope that people keep fighting to shut these places down and to bring awareness. I do believe that if your child has a drug problem or has a mental health issue, that you need to seek a medical facility and not a wilderness program, not you know, a program in an academy. They've gotten really good about renaming these places academies and schools.
Yes, they have.
And they're not teaching your children anything except how to have a dysfunctional life, and how not to function in life. And it's really tearing the relationships apart with families, with parents and children. And I encourage all parents, if you have a child that has a problem, mental health or drug issue or other problem, behavior problem, that you seek medical assistance with a medical doctor, not a doctor that's a marriage counselor, not a doctor of anthropology, but an actual medical doctor in a medical facility. And if your doctor is recommending that you put your child in a wilderness program or any other of these academies or schools, that you change doctors and you get some professional help.
Susie, if you could talk directly to the owners and people who abused you while at Straight Incorporated, what would you like to directly say to them?
You should be ashamed of yourself. And I'll speak directly to Dave Tilley.
Please do.
Dave, you abused me in that intake room. You worked for the Cobb County Board of Education. You subsequently worked over children at Mount Perrin Christian School. Dennis Buttimer, you were an assistant executive director. You are running a psychology business out of Atlanta. Suzanne Bird, You are hiding somewhere out there in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or somewhere close to there. I don't know if you've moved. You all abused me. You took part in my taking away my food, and you knew that I wasn't on drugs. There was a discussion, and y'all told, I had Pam, the senior staff member, went and told my parents that y'all didn't believe I was on drugs, yet you kept me in this place. You deprived me of an education. You caused me extreme health problems, and you should have to suffer like we did. I do believe in lex talionis, an eye for an eye. I'm not going to go do anything to you, but I hope that in your aging years, when you meet your maker, you have to answer for what you've done to all these children, including myself.
That's all you have
pretty
to say.
stiff. That's pretty stiff.
I would say so, but Susie,
I mean, I really, honestly, the parents and the directors and the staff, well, some of the kids were brainwashed into becoming staff, but I'm talking like executive staff. They should have to endure, I don't care how old they are, because we were innocent children.
Yes, we were.
And so they should have to endure the same abuse now that we had to endure then. The motivating like this. I have shoulder problems because of that, and getting physical therapy today. But you should have to do that. You should have to be carried around by the belt loop. You should have your food taken away. You should have your privileges for reading taken away. You should have your right to work taken away. You should have your right to go to school taken away. You should have your rights taken away like we did.
Yeah.
And for every person, me, it was a year. I know some people that were in there for 10 years, and that sentence should run consecutively until you die. I mean, that sounds like really stern, but I really believe that. And for the longest time, I wanted Dave Tilley and his family and his kids and his grandkids, I wanted them to go through the same thing. And I don't feel that way now.
Of course not.
But I felt that way then. For the longest time, I wanted them to go through that. And now I do. I feel like, and there's a lot of survivors who say, oh, well, my parent's elderly, my parent has health problems. We had health problems too.
Yeah, we did.
I mean, there was a lot of people put in there for ADHD. I have ADHD.
Same here. Same here.
Dyslexia or bipolar. There were a lot of people that were put in there because of their medical health issues. Well, what's the difference between making them go through it? And I still feel today, maybe all the parents should go in there and the kids should run the program. And, I don't care if you got Alzheimer's or, I'm sorry, too bad. We didn't get to see medical doctors.
No,
we didn't get to go to school. I mean, if you were on third phase and you were on third phase for a significant amount of time, you could go back to school. But who wants to go back to school a year or two later with the same people? And here you are in a lower grade. Most of the people in school, that were in straight, did not get past an elementary education.
That is very sad.
That is very sad. They didn't go to middle school and they didn't go to high school. It's really, really sad. And those people should have their rights taken away from them. Those people should be prosecuted, and we should have rights here in Georgia to go back and to sue these people for, I know I had a lawsuit, but I didn't specifically sue for sexual abuse. And now I know, after going through counseling, that is a sexual assault.
Yes,
and
it is.
My rights should not have been, when we took our 1 minute shower or 3 minute shower or whatever it was at whoever's host home, we were forced to do this in front of strangers. And we couldn't go to the bathroom without being in front of a stranger. Well, how would they like it if that's what their life was like, for however long? And I do believe that they should go through that, and I do believe that we should get some kind of compensation for the sexual assaults that we suffered. I'll never forget, I've got to say this, I know we're at the end of the video, but we had group strip searches.
Wow.
So the girls and guys were separated, but we had, 15, 20 at a time. There were like 400 people in there when I was in there, 400 kids. And so they would bring us in at groups at a time. and we had to all strip in front of each other. I don't know what was going on with that, but you know, spreading our cheeks and all, I mean, that's just, it's assault.
Yes.
And I'm just like, I've been, I guess, reserved in my adult life because of that. And I just, they should have to suffer those same things.
I agree.
And it's not a threat. I'm just saying that that's the way I feel.
I agree.
And that's what I'm saying to these people is, I think that you should have to go through what we went through, and it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what medical condition you're suffering, because it didn't matter for us.
No.
It didn't matter for us.
Didn't matter for us.
If we were doing drugs, not doing
Not at all.
drugs, if we had a mental health issue, it didn't matter what was going on in our life. You ripped us out of a community and used North Korean brainwashing techniques on us to strip our identity.
Yeah.
And there's a number of people that I'm still in contact with today. They have trouble keeping a job, getting a job, holding a job, relationship problems, and you know, they seek out people who are abusive to be in a relationship, and you just can't do that. But it's easy for me to say, oh, you don't need to be around that kind of person. That's what we were indoctrinated with. We were indoctrinated with, you know, being abusive to someone is okay. You know, calling them all kinds of names and calling them, if they were sexually molested by their parent, you know, that it's okay to call them a slut and a whore and a whatever. And it was really scary to be sent home to some of those homes when the kid had been standing up that day talking about how they'd been fondled by their father, and we were going home to that. I do want to say this before we close out.
Mm-hmm.
There was a home, one of the first homes I went to, it was the Carter's home. And I don't mind saying his name is Brian Carter. And this is after I got sent back to that home, because I had tried to escape that home. Somehow, I don't know how, the grace of God, I had gotten the lock off the window in the middle of the night when people were sleeping. We were locked in a room all together, a bedroom, and then gotten the screen off. And it was 2 stories plus a story for the basement, because the basement was raised on that side. And it was a slope on the back side with pine straw. I knew if I jumped, I was probably going to break my leg. I was halfway out the window before somebody woke up and caught me. And so when I got sent back to that home, I remember Brian, Mr. Carter, he had screamed at me. He had taken my clothes from me. So I was naked in front of this man.
Oh, wow.
It was the middle of winter, and I was in a basement. I think the girl's bedroom was off that basement. And he said, I've got this. And he said he had military experience, and that he was going to put me in some kind of contraption that would keep me in a fetal position all night long. And I had to actually, this went on for, God, it seemed like all night, but I know it was probably an hour or so. And I was crying, standing there naked in front of a strange man. That I don't know if he was a pedophile or what. I mean, I don't know anything about his background or anything, but he was definitely doing something that I would never do to a child, or that anybody I know would. You know, I know you wouldn't do that to a child. It's inappropriate. And I had to beg for my clothes back piece by piece in order to get them back. And it was so traumatic that
Sure was.
I can remember the space in the basement, and they laughed because they said they lived up on Lake Lanier, and it had bars on the windows, you know, like to keep people from coming in. And they said, we got bars on these windows, you won't get out. And I do remember that. I can't remember anything about what the outside of the house looked like. I can't remember which parent transported us to the home that evening, which parent transported us from the home the next morning to the straight building. I do remember it was on a lake. I remember the bars on the window, and I definitely remember that incident and standing there in front of him as a 16-year-old with no clothes on. It was just crazy.
That does sound crazy. You know, I can't believe something like that actually happened to you. But it does make me want to ask you one more thing.
Okay. It just keeps going, doesn't, like a rabbit hole.
Sort of. But you telling me this has made me want to ask you one more thing. If you could talk directly to some of the younger survivors of the troubled teen industry. What would you like to say to them? What would you like them to know?
Well, some of the survivors don't know they're survivors. I will tell you that me and my best friend, we fought relentlessly to get somebody that she knew out of she knew the mother and knew the family, out of a wilderness program that is nearby up in Clayton, Georgia.
Okay.
And she got an extra meal a week, and she got treated much better than she would have because of the complaints that we made. And she's still brainwashed. She thinks, I guess, that she didn't at the time, but she thinks, I guess, that it was a private family matter and she may have deserved that treatment. You didn't deserve that treatment. None of the survivors, none of you deserve that treatment. It doesn't matter what you were doing. You were a normal teenager transitioning into adulthood. And even for the people who were smoking pot or doing different things, I mean, if it was really bad, they needed medical help. You needed medical help. It was not your fault. If you were just, experimenting with drugs, that is I wasn't normal. I came from a dysfunctional household. I wasn't normal. I was scared. My parents would beat the hell out of me if I snuck out or skipped school or tried drugs or sipped on alcohol. I was scared. But that was normal transitioning into adulthood, and you didn't deserve to go through that. You didn't deserve to be abused. You didn't deserve to be locked up and your life taken away from you. There's no way you can get those years back. I hope that you become like me and some of the other people that fight for the closure of these places. Fight for the people that are still suffering inside, and be abreast of the new ways that they're trying to circumvent. Oh, well, we can't do this anymore. Like, oh, we can't keep them out of the sunlight inside in a warehouse anymore. An old A&P warehouse. That's where I was, a converted A&P warehouse. So now we're going to take them outside. They're getting vitamin D, but be aware of what's going on with those programs and the picture that they're painting on the outside, and be an advocate for the kids that are in there, and never stop fighting. You can get your life back. I am now a business owner. It is possible to find joy, and I think that you can. Sometimes you just need to work through it. And for me, I mean, it was best not to speak to my family again. I mean, sometimes you have to break those ties, but you have to decide that for yourself.
Yes, you do. Well, Susie, thank you very much for meeting up with me today.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. It's been Program Stories with Miss Susie here. Thank you very much.